Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the Senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. Welcome to this week's edition of Kibbitzing with Kagan, brief conversations with people I find fascinating. I know you are going to watch this one because Chrissy Nizer is the longtime head of our MVA, our Motor Vehicles Administration. Chrissy, Madam Administrator, thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you on your podcast.
Yay. So everybody dreads going to the MVA. I was thinking about what the analogy would be, and I was thinking about colonoscopy. I thought that was too extreme. So I thought dentist. Don't like going to the dentist, fearful of going to the MVA. And in this conversation, I want to give people reassurance that it's not something to be feared. So let's start with your background. You went to Goucher, got your undergraduate, and then graduated from Rutgers from the Eagleton Institute in public policy. And you worked at the General Assembly, worked at the Public Service Commission. How did you find your way to transportation and to the MVA? Because you've been there a long time.
I have, it's funny because when I talk to students whether high school or college and they're trying to go on their career path, I always explain to them my graduate degree was in education policy. So, and actually I spent a brief time at the Federal Department of Education right after grad school. It's going to change the world and make things different, and just found couldn't have that firsthand impact, which is what I was craving. So actually just somebody recommended that John Quo, new administrator at the time at MVA, was somebody great to work for, and I should put my hat. There was a role in that was of interest, and interviewed, and so grateful that he decided to give me this opportunity.
Wow. So you've been there since August of 2006 and have
Yes.
been almost 9 years as the administrator. I would venture to say, and there are two words that I really dislike. I hate the word politician and I hate the word bureaucrat because I think they're almost always used as negatives. But I would venture to say that you are one of the most popular and admired bureaucrats in Maryland state government. So let's talk about that journey. Why are you, what are you doing right? What can people learn from you about, and we're going to go into the details of everything at the MVA, but what is it that makes the MVA work so well?
Well, first of all, I really appreciate it. Certainly a compliment. I think that what I've always been dedicated to is good service, right? So I was raised in a family. It was very much about public service, giving back, right? Whether it was at the church, in the community, we were very much involved. And so for me, when I thought about what I wanted to do, it was about that. How do I make life better for people every day? And while education policy is where I started, if you think about it, MVA touches every person in the state. Even if you don't drive, you have that ID card for medical services. And so for me, when I became administrator, and even before that, we established this goal of premier customer service because, as you said, MBAs, DMVs have been the butt of every joke for years and years. But how do we change that around? How do we make that a different perception?
Yes.
First of all, it's about responsiveness. As you know, I really pride myself in getting back to people with accurate, timely information. So important, I think. But it's
You're
also about how do
amazing
we
at that.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. But it's also empowering our team, right? It's not a one person job. It's not an executive team job. And so it has been a journey to really transform the organization in a way that not only have our systems improved, which you certainly can talk about, but our employees are part of the process of bringing forward great ideas to make changes that make sense for the customer. And our customers make great suggestions or sometimes maybe complaints, but that's okay. It gives us an opportunity to get better.
I love it. So you say, quote, safety and customer service are my two real passions. So let's take those separately. So let's start with safety. So let's start with Vision Zero. There are about 600 highway fatalities each year, according to you, and about 23% of that, about 1 in 4, are pedestrians. How does the MVA have a role in that?
Well, if you think about it, we train every driver for that new license, right? We are part of the process. And then as you have infractions on your license, you may have to go to court. You may have to take a suspension, ignition interlock now, especially with the new legislation that
Let's
people will be hearing about.
let's talk about ignition interlock. What is that?
So ignition interlock is a device that you're required if you have a driving under the influence infraction to install on your vehicle. Requires you to blow into it in order to start the vehicle. It requires your blood alcohol content reading to be below a certain amount, and will prohibit the vehicle from starting if that doesn't happen. You actually have to blow randomly as well while you're driving just to ensure you didn't have somebody else start the vehicle and that you're impaired behind the wheel. It's really a program about changing behavior because we know alcoholism is a disease and it's something that many people struggle with, and we certainly appreciate that. But ignition interlock is seen as one tool, one important tool to be able to change that behavior. And I know many people have gone through it and said, maybe not on the first time, but after being on the program, it really did help them enforce that they needed to make a difference, make a change.
Before we go on from ignition interlock, that is about alcohol. But one of the issues that I've worked on over the years is DUID, driving under the influence of drugs. So is there technology yet available to prevent stoned people on cannabis or other drugs from getting behind the wheel?
Wish there was, because unfortunately we are seeing these people every day. I was just talking to one of my colleagues about somebody who their dependency was on a drug, right? And so we don't have the same technology that we do with ignition interlock. That's certainly something folks are working on from a law enforcement perspective. You have drug recognition experts, they've been
Yep.
trained highly on what to look for and see. But you're right, with absent a blood test, which obviously only happens in the most severe of cases,
Yep.
we really don't yet have that technology. So I'm sure it'll move forward, just like with ignition interlock, there's something called driver alcohol detection systems for safety. And there is a push at the national level to have that installed on your vehicle for everyone. So right now it's considered an offender program. You have an offense, you put it on your vehicle.
Yes.
But what if, because how many times you hear somebody say, well, I didn't realize I was impaired.
Right.
What if your vehicle could tell you that? Wouldn't that be a
Mm,
huge lifesaver for
wow.
so many people if you think about what the numbers look like in impaired driving? So something technology can bring us from a safety standpoint.
And it used to be not that long ago that if you didn't drive your car home from the party, you were kind of stranded potentially, unless you got a sober friend or something. But now with Lyft and Uber and stuff, there
Yes.
are options. There kind of is no excuse for driving impaired.
That's really the message, right? Make a plan before you go if you know you're going to drink, and then certainly so many good options, whether it's mass transit, whether it's our rideshare, taxi services, so many good options, or just phone a friend, right? Nobody wants to get that other call, which is that something tragic happened. So much rather be woken up early in the morning or late at night to give a ride to a friend.
Yes. Um, uh, Biggest no-no on the road other than impaired driving. Anything else that you want to share here?
Yeah, so the biggest things we see, so impairment obviously is one of them, speed, still people not buckling that seatbelt and distraction. So when you look at the rates, we're over 90% of people as we observe them driving being buckled up, but we're still seeing a problem in the back seat with people not buckling up.
Okay.
And when you look at the crash data, we lose between 50 and 100 people every year who are not buckled. And so that's the one thing I say to every group I talk to. It takes just a few seconds even in the back seat. And one thing I like to share is that, if you're not doing it for yourself, even as the driver, make sure that everybody's following that rule, because we've had some tragic crashes where somebody was not buckled in the back. People were secure in the front, but they became a projectile during that crash and they actually killed or severely injured the person in the front seat. So it's in everybody's best interest, everybody in the vehicle, every time, no matter how far you're going. That's still one of those misperceptions as well.
Quick story. When I was in high school, a friend and I were going out for lunch, and and he said, "Okay, buckle your seatbelt." We did. We ended up being in a crash and rolling down a hill. Literally, the
My
car
gosh.
rolled over and landed
Wow.
at the bottom. And anyway, we were both fine. He got a
Thank
little cut on
goodness.
his hand. I was fine, and we were both buckled up. So early
That's a great
story.
example, perfect example of how it can really save a life.
Yes. So let's talk, and so that's anything more on public safety before we go on to
I
custom?
just also mention we have the Highway Safety Office in Maryland at MVA, which means we get a lot of great grant funding. So I want to make sure your listeners are aware of that. That can go to community groups as well as government agencies who are working on safety efforts. Now, this is not fixing the roads. Obviously, there's a huge engineering component, but this is about changing behavior and educating people. So we always love to have new partners. So I did want to
Yeah.
mention that as well.
child safety seats?
Yes, and they are a big partner. Certainly, we work with the Department of Health, and give out free seats in certain circumstances when individuals can't afford it. So that is one important area that we always want to make sure our youngest passengers arrive safely to their destination.
Perfect. Well, so let's talk about customer service, which is what you're known for and which is extraordinary. So, what are some of the biggest changes that you've implemented over your many years there?
So one of the things, and it's not complicated, it's not the IT system, so I'll talk about that in a minute. But really, I go out to every branch once every 6 months, and I have a conversation before the branch opens with the team about, okay, here's where we are as an organization. Here's any legislation that's passed. Tell me what we can do to make it easier for you all. And I will say many of the legislative initiatives we've done, certainly many of the system changes, process changes we've made have come directly out of those meetings. I love the conversation with them. I love the idea that, initially a little suspect, right? And thought, well, is anything really going to happen here? But we were careful to try to provide that feedback. And so it really has created an environment, I think, where people know that we're open to suggestions. We want to make things better. It's about continual improvement. We never arrive at the destination. Technology is always improving. Customers' expectations are always changing. And the other piece that's really important to me is how our employees feel about themselves. So if you think about it, being the butt of every joke,
Oh,
miserable experience, how would you feel if that was your job to go every day
sure.
and provide that service?
Yeah,
And so building that morale, talking about, no, no, your premier customer service, you are the agent to that, you are empowered, is really important. Are there still rough days for our employees? Of course there are. But, on whole, it's important that we are their cheerleader, that we're always pushing them forward and really holding them up for the great public servants they are, which is what I like to call it.
I love it.
One of the other things, we did get a major IT system modernization, which obviously has enabled us to do many things. If your audience does not have their My MVA account yet, I encourage them to go to our website. It's mva.maryland.gov. And you can sign up there. You will need your license, your ID card with you to go through the sign up process. We obviously want to confirm who you are.
Of course.
60 transactions available to you there. But even to me, more important than that, any letter, email, correspondence we sent to you, it's all there at your fingertips 24 hours a day. If you want to look up and say, when's my next VEEP test? It's in your information is there.
Okay, let's say
My
what a beep
license
test, the
expired.
vehicle emissions
I'm sorry, yes,
inspection
vehicle
program.
emissions inspection program. Thank
Yeah.
you. So all that good information, I love the fact that it's right there. In fact, we made a change from an email perspective to make it more secure, where we do secure messaging. And we pointed people to their MyMBA account. When we started doing that, 20% reduction in messages because they were finding the information right there.
So Veep is the perfect example. And as you know, my emissions test was coming up during session. I was like,
Yes,
okay, I could go at midnight, the self-serve on a weekend. And you said you can just ask for an extension. The
exactly.
extension request took 2 seconds. And now I did it a week after we adjourned, and it's done and I passed and it's fine. So some of that is just that's great customer service by you, by the system, by all that. So let's let's move on. What was your biggest trick? What's the best thing you've done to reduce wait times? Because that's kind of what people assume. They have to bring, a 600-page book and plan to read the whole thing while waiting for the MVA.
I actually love that when I see somebody with that book, or they brought their lunch to eat while they were sitting there, and they hardly sit down now before they get called up. One thing I will say that has been a benefit, and COVID was a horrible time for all of us, but we had to go to an appointments only system. And that way we could control safely how many people could come in the branch. And what we realized, by managing the appointment system to maximize the ability to bring customers in post COVID, we could still maintain that great system to allow customers to have a better experience. Our wait time is 5 minutes or less, statewide average. And it's not just the rural branches. Back in the day, you might go to Easton or Salisbury and have that great experience, but be in a more metro branch and have to wait to be honest, an hour. And we always said we want the whole state to have that great experience. Appointments has really enabled that. And so we're proud that we kept appointments since COVID has dissipated a little bit. I know it's still something we deal with, but that has been a great step forward for the organization. And one thing that, as we look internally with our employees, there were times we shut the door at 4:30. Everybody in the branch was served. That meant for some of our employees, they weren't getting out till 7:30 or 8. No certainty, right? From a timing standpoint of getting home to your kids and going to their soccer game. Now, with appointments, they know when they're going to be able to leave. Their quality of life is so much better. So it not only has helped the customer have a great experience, it's also enabled our employees to have a much better quality of life.
That's fantastic. They deserve it.
Yes.
Let's talk about people for whom English is not their primary language, which is huge in my district. Talk about how the MVA serves them and accommodates some of their language needs.
No, I'm glad you asked that question. And so we just recently increased the number of languages available, not only the law test, as well as the driver's manual. And so folks can not only study in their native language, but also take the law test that way. And something we did along with that I'm really proud of and want to talk about is plain language. So I know not a lot of people know about it as a federal, I know you do, you know very well about it, but we had a young man who came to us, and it was one of these heartbreaking stories. I think he had taken the test maybe 30 times. And his mom got to us and said, look, he knows the material, right? And so we started working with him to give him the test. We have accommodations. We read the test, we do it on time, but none of that was working for him because of his particular disability. And what she opened our eyes to is that translating our material in plain language could really make a huge difference.
Yes.
We were able to get that done. He passed the test, but we're able to get that done for everybody now. Since we implemented last year in fall, we've had a 15% increase in the test month over month. I mean, it stayed at that level. And I think about that. It's not about the percentage. Those are people who are walking out
15%
with
increase
awareness
in passage.
in passage.
In passage, like first time, say, or
Yeah, overall passage.
overall passage.
And so, right, many people passing on the first time, not having to come back again, the
Yes.
empowerment of that, not feeling like, oh no, I'm going to go and fail again.
Right.
Just really proud of the accessibility that provides. And what it taught me is not only does it benefit people with disabilities, it benefits everybody. We all have different levels of reading, different challenges that we face, right? And so we're really looking to spread the use of plain language, but I've been talking about all throughout with my colleagues across the country, because I think there's much we can do for accessibility and really making sure we're doing the right thing for people.
I'm going to give you the names of a couple of delegates here because I passed a simplified ballot language bill out of the Senate, and it just said it should all be out of the Senate, it came out as 6th grade, just so everybody can understand what they're being asked to vote on. 6th grade, 8th grade, 10th grade, plain English, however you define it, but don't give them legalese and expect them to cast an informed vote. So yeah, same thing. Motor voter, speaking of elections, let's talk about that. Now, when that was first rolled out, and just for people who may not remember or may take it for granted because they've never known it otherwise, is when you get a driver's license or renew a driver's license, you are offered the opportunity to register to vote or change your party, update your information. Why don't you talk about that? Because there were some serious glitches at the very beginning with the MVA not effectively being able to share technology and data with the Board of Elections. How does that work now?
And if you think about it, even going back to the beginning, when I first started MVA, the way it would work is we would actually print out your voter registration form. You remember that, with your contact information at the top, and you had to fill it out yourself and either give it to us or take it to state board. So we've come a long way.
Yes.
So as you said, right now that application is completely embedded when you do your driver's license or ID card transaction. That's whether you do it at our branch, online, or at the kiosk. It's the same as what you would do if you were completing it with state Board of Election. So initially, it was a huge change, obviously, to put all that information in the system. We're also querying the State Board of Election to say, Cheryl Kagan already registered, so we don't ask you questions that probably would wind up, frustrating you.
No. I am asked every time whether I want to change my party, and I just laugh all the time. I was like, Yeah, no, I'm good. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I don't think so. So there's certain questions we ask every time, but some things it allows us to match you up with the record so we don't create duplicates for the state board on their end. But there was an issue, a programming issue. Sometimes very small things can have very big impacts. So on a translation, some change of addresses, the programmer put in the code that those were not to be sent to the State Board of Elections for updating information. Literally, if you think of a 0 and 1 or 1 and a 2, right? This group goes, this group doesn't go. I don't want to oversimplify it because it had a huge impact, but really that was the cause of it, just a miscoding of the data, because we were sending data and that's what made it hard to distinguish. There was a lot of data that we had been sending, but this one particular group of folks who had done a change of address during a particular period of time were not sent. So we had to quickly work with State Board of Elections to send all those names to them. So if you came to your precinct, they would have that information there and you would not be impeded from voting because of that computer issue. Again, it was another great learning. I'm sorry.
No, please, go ahead.
Great learning lessons. So many things have been put in place since then.
Yeah.
Checks and balances between us and the state board. We actually audit the records every 30 days. We take a chunk of records and some of them are online, in person, by mail. We look at everything. Not only do we look to make sure our transaction was right, we actually check the voter rolls, right? What's online and make sure it matches up with what you asked for. Because if there's a disconnect, then somewhere along the line, something happened. And frankly, we found issues where it was maybe a local board was having delays in processing. And so that's why it wasn't up to date. But we answer all those questions to make sure that when you go to vote, we want you to have confidence that your information is accurate and up to date. And what you ask for is what's there.
Okay, so there are a lot of people who are conspiracy theorists, so let's just ask directly. What happens with dead people or people who move out of state? Now, there is ERIC, which is the Electronic Registration Information Center. That does voter registration data and deaths and social security numbers and stuff. But what does the MVA do with dead people to make sure that nobody's voting in the name of a dead person or someone who
That's
has
a great
moved out of state?
question. Yeah, so we coordinate with the Department of Health. They're obviously the repository for people who live and die in Maryland. So we get updates from them on a regular basis. We update our records not only for voting, but for other purposes. We don't want somebody using your handicap placard or other things if you're deceased. Sometimes things happen, unfortunately. So we mark the record overall. Obviously, State Board does some work with the vital records as well. We actually took the additional step recently. There is an organization, the National Association of Public Health Officials, and that enabled us to get records for people even who die out of state, because we're very close to other jurisdictions. People might be visiting relatives, and so we're actually in that process of going through and matching our records with vital records agencies from across the country to help, again, make sure our records are as clean as possible. It's really important to us. We do a lot of electronic verification, whether it's your social security number, your passport number, all these things are electronic systems for now, and the same is true in death records.
Right. So there are people who want to know that our records are 100% up to date. And if they think about it for a second, someone new just turned 18, someone new just died, someone new just moved. So even if it's accurate this second, 5 minutes from now, it's not accurate anymore. So what's the lag time? Grandma dies, you guys find out because someone turns in her plates or something, or you find out through one of your systems. How long does it take to get that information to the Board of Elections? And then we will move on. But I just want to kind of beat this dead horse a little bit to reassure people.
Yeah, the great thing is our systems are real time now. That was one of the great things about the system update we did, right? Before we had to do these batch updates. Now everything's real time. So we are communicating with the Board of Elections every night of updates and information. And so, yeah, it's that quickly as soon as we're aware of it. We'll say we do verify. So we don't just take the word of somebody anymore, because we do have these electronic systems. And again, we've had issues where, maybe people are in a dispute and they reported somebody as deceased, and there can be horrible ramifications for that.
Yeah.
So we got to be careful and we do it the right way. But yes, it's very quick.
That's right. I had a constituent a couple of years ago
You
who was
did.
notified that he died, and he called me and I'm clearly alive. And He's
Well,
a good
actually,
guy.
funny story, we did this national match, right? And found out one of our customers we thought was deceased, reported by the DC Vital Records Office. And he showed up with the letter in the branch and said, no, this is me.
Oh,
And so we contacted DC and said, DC, you have to update your records because their records have this poor man as deceased and he's very
wow.
much alive in
Yeah.
Maryland. So
Yeah,
I guess we helped him clean his records a little bit that way.
exactly. Um, uh, red light cameras and speed cameras. And you and I worked on license plates, obscured license plates. And as folks watching or listening may know, or may be interested in knowing, my very first bill that I ever passed when I was in the House of Delegates in 1995 was outlawing tinted license plate covers. And you still sometimes see them, but not as many as there used to be. If the license plate can't be read by a machine or easily by a person, then they're not going to get an infraction. They're not going to be able to catch the kidnapped child. They're not going to be able to catch the hit and run driver, all that. So why don't you speak to that and the pilot program you guys have started?
It is so important. I know everybody thinks about the license plate and they have their preferences, whether it's because they love the Bay Foundation or the Ag Foundation, or they just like the way it looks and with their vehicle and the colors on it.
Right.
I think that, what people fail to think about, or at least firsthand, is the fact that it really was meant to be read by law enforcement, right? That is the intention. And so whether you do it deliberately or it's just wear and tear, it is really important that we maintain that visibility of the license plate. And so we've started a new program where for our older plates, when you renew, again, online, you get the question as well as at the kiosk, and you can do it as well at the counter. You can choose to get a new plate. Now, it won't be the same number. So I know some people have a preference for their number, but it would be a shiny new plate, and we're not going to charge you for it because we think it's in the best interest of public safety for everybody to be able to read it. So we just started this in January. So I will encourage your listeners as they're coming up for renewal, consider that option and think about, it's always nice to have a new plate on your vehicle. So a
Right,
little
yeah.
bonus you get at the MVA when you're completing that registration transaction.
Excellent. Um, electronic vehicles, anything, does that change anything with you guys? Electric vehicles,
Electric vehicles. So there
EVs.
are electric vehicle fees. They do not go into effect until July of next year. So we'll be doing some messaging as we get there. We are excited that we're around 100,000 electric vehicles in Maryland, quite a milestone. Obviously, from where we started, still much work to do, but we certainly closely follow those registrations and new vehicle purchases.
Good. Um, are you a safe driver?
Certainly try to be a safe driver. I think all of us have our moments, right? But I do think it's a great question you ask because everybody thinks it's the other driver, right? It's always
Mm,
the other person.
mm,
And so interestingly, I did read across Maryland this year where we went out and read a safety book to elementary school children.
nice.
And the stories they told me about things that they had observed in the car, whether it was somebody like using their knees to steer the car while they pulled their hair back in a, these children did not make up these stories, they observed them.
Yes,
And so it was a great reminder for me, when you have little ones in the car, they are
they're watching.
always watching. So
Yeah,
as a parent or grandparent or aunt, uncle, whatever it is, remember that, right?
right.
Drive like you want them to drive because you always want them to be safe.
What is your biggest pet peeve on the road?
I would just say courtesy. Courtesy is gone. The times where, and I still do it, you wave because somebody lets you in. People look at you like you're like, what's wrong with that person? Is she trying to be rude to me? I think we talked about a culture of courtesy. The governor and lieutenant governor had a work zone safety group. And that culture of courtesy is something that everybody universally kind of were drawn to. If we could just get back to that, there's so much, I think, especially post COVID, people are driving too fast. They're really aggressive on the roads. It's so dangerous.
Okay.
If we could all just slow down a little bit and realize you're not going to get there that much faster. What, a minute or two? Is that really
Right,
worth it?
right,
Especially if you're in a crash.
right.
So that's really my pet peeve. Let's all like return to being courteous to each other, not only in person, which is important to me as well, especially in
Mm,
our branch offices,
mm,
but
mm.
on the roadways as well. I think you're behind that car, and so people feel that anonymity, right? They're not in person with you in the same
Yes,
ways.
yes, yes, yes. Two quick questions, then we'll wrap up. What is your proudest accomplishment and what is your biggest challenge? What's left to be done?
Mm. Well, I say there's always more left to be done, right? Especially at the MBA, because things are always evolving. And I will say our customers are used to dealing with these large companies who have all this technology at their disposal. And so I think expectations have changed, frankly, and people expect it to be faster, quicker, more accurate, all of those things. We are working on modernizing our contact center, our call center, as well as email, chatbot, all of those things. And my goal is really, it doesn't matter how you want to contact us, you should get that quick quality information in a response. So that's something that I'm excited about in the next few years to see some improvement there. Proudest accomplishment, I think overall, just the work we've done, again, on that premier customer service mission, vision. The entire team has really come together. You can talk to a customer agent in a branch office, and that means something to them. It's hard to make that kind of culture change. It doesn't happen overnight. I have been here a while, and I've been blessed to be great leaders before me who also saw the vision of where we could go. That continuity is so important. I think that together we accomplish great things. It's not one individual ever. And so that's what I'm proud of. I'm proud, that we have worked hard to really change, at least in Maryland, the perception and not make it like going to these feared appointments or things you don't really want to do.
Right. Love it. Love it. Okay. Chrissy Nizer, Administrator of the Motor Vehicles Administration. It is time for the Fast Five. 5 quick questions, 5 quick answers. Question number 1, what is your favorite car that you've ever owned or that you aspire to own? My intern came up with that question, which I loved, actually.
That's a good one. I like it. Currently own an Audi. I like the Audi, but I'm always looking for new things. So we'll see. We'll see what the next one is.
All right. Question 2, what is the most adventurous thing that you've ever done, and would you do it again?
But one of the things I love doing, I drove across country right after grad school. I did the southern route, so it's on my bucket list to do the northern route. It took a good week and a half, but it was wonderful to see the things that you never normally see off the beaten path. I loved it.
That's fantastic. Who is a shero or hero of yours? Who inspires you?
So, my grandmother, who unfortunately is not with us anymore, she grew up in an era where it was not traditional for women to be out in the workplace. And yet she was, and she became one of the first female officers at Providence Savings Bank, which has been since bought out. But she was always that model to me, that she was very traditional at home and always had dinner on the table, but she also told me that I could do whatever I wanted to do. And then I could sit there right alongside the men, and you might feel a little awkward. And she's like, my feet didn't touch the floor because she's a little short like me, vertically challenged. But she gave me that confidence to say, you know what, you can do whatever you want to do. And I really appreciate that.
Yay, Grandma. That's fantastic. Question number 4, what is a hobby or a skill that you've always aspired to learn?
So many things. So I love gardening. So that's something that I really enjoy doing. I'd like to be a little better at it, but I do love doing that. I love cooking as well. Again, not perfect at it, but I love and enjoy doing that. So I love just tinkering with different things, to be honest. It's not one thing that in particular.
That's great. Those are 2 things I'm not especially good at, actually. Question number 5, the question I ask all of my guests. Chrissy Nizer, MVA Administrator, what is your hidden secret superpower? What's a skill or talent you have, something you're really good at that most folks can't do?
Wow, that's a big one. I don't know that it's most folks can't do, but I think it's something that people don't do often enough, which is maybe listen. I try to really pay attention to what's going on in the room, the things that aren't said. I always say it always worries me who's not at the table to give their perspective, because that's what winds up causing problems down the road. So certainly not a superpower, but I try to be a good listener and to really understand what's going on.
That's fantastic. Well, Chrissy Nizer, thank you for your many, many years of service to our state, to our state's drivers and non-drivers, for your aspiration to excellence, and for being one of the few survivors that has gone from Democratic to Republican to Democratic administrations and survived and thrived. And it's just a pleasure working with you always. And thank you for taking the time to kibitz.
Thank you.
I'll look forward to seeing you sometime soon. Take care.
You as well.